Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams of water in the desert wasteland. In ancient Israel, the people of God were waiting for a day when this crazy, messed up world would be made right. The chaotic wilderness of the desert that surrounded their country was the perfect image to describe the chaos of the world. Famine, disease, and destruction, poverty, hunger, and injustice. The darkness was deep, the problem seemed too big. The chaotic wilderness was taking over. But still they hungered and thirsted for righteousness, for justice, for the world to be made right. They were dying of thirst. They needed those streams of water in the desert, someone to come, someone to satisfy that thirst. They needed someone to make a way. The good news is, Jesus was that someone. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is that way in the wilderness. Jesus is the one who brings streams of water in the desert, streams of living water that bring life. Just like the people of Israel, we also long for the world to be made right. The way of Jesus is the path to that goal. We are followers of the way. We are wayfarers.
let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so.
Alrighty. Well, welcome to Wayfarers Christian Church. My name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers. I'm just so excited that you've decided to join us today. We have, over the last few weeks, been having all kinds of technical difficulties as we've been figuring out our live stream, and we ended up with a whole new system. We reworked the whole system, changed all the components, changed everything out. We tried something new this week, so hopefully things are working. Hopefully things are going right this time, and I'm super excited that we get the chance to be able to worship together live, all at the same time in person again. Last week we did a pre-recorded service because we were on site at Wildfire Christian Camp, a camp that some friends of ours have started that's doing some really, really awesome work. We still have a donation page up for Wildfire, and if any of you are wanting to donate to an awesome ministry that's doing some amazing things, I would encourage you to just go to our website, wayfarerscc.com/give, and you'll be able to give specifically to Wildfire Camp and the work that they are doing there. If you didn't get a chance to watch our pre-recorded service, I would encourage you, just go back, look at last Sunday's service. It was an awesome occasion. We were able to be out in kind of the beauty of the outdoors in the fall, and it was just a really awesome experience that I know a lot of us that were able to be there, we really enjoyed that. But kind of, I guess partly because of some of those technical difficulty issues we've been having, and just kind of our general feelings as a team and as a church, we have had a lot of conversations with a lot of you that have been watching live about wanting to try to see what we can do to start having services in person. So we're going to be giving more details along the way as we go, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys the heads up. Our plan is, Lord willing, we're going to kind of keep an eye on COVID-19 cases, see how things are going. We want to be wise about it. But as long as we can have the proper precautions in place and everything works out right, like again, Lord willing, we are hoping to start doing in-person services here on location in about 1 month, so 1 month from now. So like I said, we'll be giving you more details, but I wanted to kind of give you all the heads up. If you're watching live, if you've been watching our live streams and you want to come be a part of this in person, you're going to get a chance to in about a month. So, just kind of keep your eyes and ears out. We'll give you more information along the way. And about a month from now, we're going to start our in-person services. If you watch the live stream, don't worry. We're still going to keep doing the live stream. We're going to keep doing both. That's something that's really important to us. We want to keep doing both things at the same time. So if you are more comfortable staying home watching the live stream, that is totally fine. We're still going to be doing that for you. But for those of you that want that in-person experience, we're going to be opening that up in about a month. So in this sermon series, we've been going through the book of Genesis, kind of verse by verse through these first few verses, this first chapter of Genesis. We've been really picking it apart, kind of going through lots of the details. And a big part of my desire through this series has been to help explain the cultural background and the context behind a lot of these passages. When we read the words in our English translations, lots of times we can think we know what those passages are talking about. But we have to remember that this book, this poem at the very beginning of Genesis, it was written to a very specific group of people in a very specific time and place. That specific group of people was the Israelites, the people of Israel, Jewish people, living in various times and in various places, but at minimum over 2,000 years ago. And so it's really important to keep that context in mind as we understand what each of these passages and each of these verses are talking about. So today we are looking at these passages that can be a little bit interesting. They talk about God separating the waters above from the waters below, and they use, especially in the English translations, these weird words. The vault it talks about. The Hebrew word that's translated vault there is a really fun word. It's called rakia, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that, giving you more of an explanation of what that Hebrew word means. But it's one of those verses that can be really, really weird to read in English, and it's hard to kind of get the context for it unless we kind of dive into the world of the original hearers, of those original Jewish people over 2,000 years ago. So that's what I want to do today. I want to give us a little bit of that background context so we can really understand what these verses are talking about. And I think if I had to just sum up one word about what these verses in Genesis are talking about, they are talking about fear. What are the things that we fear? Now, to explain that a little bit, I kind of have to tell you a little bit of some background on me, a little bit of a story from, I guess, my preteen years. I kind of interestingly just did not learn to swim until I was like 14 years old. I was always just the guy. I stayed on the shallow end of the pool. If you've heard my other sermons or heard a little bit about me or know a little bit about me, you know that I have a lot of anxiety issues and a lot of fears. I've had fear of flying and all kinds of weird fears of medical issues. But kind of one of my original fears, one of the very first things I remember I used to be really, really afraid of was swimming. I was just terrified of drowning, really. I wasn't afraid of swimming. It was the drowning. Drowning still sounds like one of the worst ways to die. And I've seen stats before where people will list worst ways to die, and drowning is always at the very top. So I think it's a fear that we can all kind of relate to. And when I was a preteen, like I said, when I was about 13 years old, my mother kind of took it upon herself that she was going to force me to learn to swim, and she did it in a really interesting way. She also kind of forcefully signed me up for Boy Scouts at the time, which I like to describe myself as an avid indoorsman. I like to take advantage of the indoors. I'm not an outdoors guy at all, and I think my mom figured she could kill two birds with one stone. She would sign me up for Boy Scouts. We would go to summer camp, and she signed me up in the summer camp for swimming lessons. So it kind of just happened all at once. She sent me into a lot of my biggest fears. I went to Boy Scout summer camp that first year. I only lasted 1 year. I quit after this Boy Scout summer camp. So if that tells you anything about how the experience went for me, I've got a million stories from that camp. But one of the things that we did do is I took swimming lessons. We were going to learn to swim. It was in the lake there at the scout camp that I was at. It was me and about 5 other guys who were the only other ones that didn't know how to swim. And it was really cool how they did it. They took it in steps. You know, they had us in the shallow end first. We had to walk. We were able to just kind of walk into the shallow end. They taught us how to balance a little bit. They taught us how to do one stroke and then another stroke. They taught us how to float. They kind of took it through steps. And it was over a 2-week period. We just kind of ramped it up slowly each day. So that it was really calm, really easy, and you always knew there were lifeguards, there were people around that could help you. But to get the swimming badge, to complete the class, the very last thing I had to do was you had to go to the end of a dock in the deep end of the lake, and you had to jump in. You had to jump in to the dock. You didn't have to dive. You didn't have to do anything weird. Most of the guys, they belly flopped, honestly, so it didn't really matter. They just needed to see that you would jump into the deep end and that you could just kind of tread water for like 30 seconds. It wasn't a big deal. But I was terrified. I remember I was so scared of this very last day where I knew I was going to have to jump into the water, just straight off the dock into the deep end of the water. And I sat there and I dreaded it all week long. We ramped up to it. I did pretty good on all of the other bits and pieces, but I'm kind of ashamed to say when the final day came and I had to jump into the deep end, all the other guys in the class, they all did it, really scared. Had to have some motivation from the scout leader. But I got to the edge of that dock. I looked into that water, which when you're looking in lake water, you can't see anything. It's just total blackness, total darkness. It was this gross lake that we were swimming in. And I just couldn't do it. I turned around. I told the scoutmaster, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm not going to get the badge. I'm going to fail this class. And I did. I turned around. I chickened out. It was about a week after that when I finally got home from the scout trip that I decided, I don't know, I guess I was feeling extra ashamed of not having completed that one thing. And so my grandpa had a pool at his apartment complex, and I took my brother up to the pool and I told him, all right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna jump into the deep end of this pool. I'm gonna finally make it happen. And I pretty much told my brother, if I don't do it, if you see me trying to chicken out, you need to just like push me in. Like, just like, don't give me the option. I need to face my fears. I need to do this. I need to jump in. And I did it. About a week later, maybe it was a little more controlled of a environment. I don't know exactly what it was about that. But luckily, my brother, he did not have to push me in. I did it all of my own accord. It ended up being a lot of fun. That really started the summer that was just a blast. Me and my brother went to my grandpa's pool pretty much every day that summer. I got really good at swimming. We got a good opportunity to go hang out with my grandpa, swim in that pool. And it was a really, really good time. But I had to face that fear. I had to face that fear, which is a very common fear, the fear of swimming, the fear of drowning. And it's really interesting. I said I'm kind of wanting to give you the context of the Jewish people here. There was a common thread actually with the ancient Jewish people, this same fear that I had, a deep fear of the water and a deep fear of drowning. This is a common thread that runs throughout all of the Hebrew scriptures. It's really interesting. There is this intense fear of the water, fear of the ocean especially, that you see in a lot of the ancient Israelites and a lot of the Old Testament. Now, I didn't learn this on my own. I mentioned in a sermon a few weeks ago that me and my wife, we got an opportunity a couple years ago to go to Israel. And we had this really awesome guide, this guy named Mark Zeiss. I've got a picture of Mark Zeiss that we can pull up here on the slide here real quick. This is Mark Zeiss. This was our guide. He was the coolest guy ever. I've got some incredible stories about him that I'm kind of saving for another time. I'm going to just kind of tease it a little bit. You'll have to tune in. Probably in a couple weeks, I think I'm going to be covering the story about Mark Zeiss and how he actually fought off a rabid dog on this trip, ended up contracting rabies and beating it. The dude is just like the most like intense, awesome guy ever. He was this really, really great guide who was also really, really knowledgeable about the people of Israel and that time and that place. And he was the one that told us a little bit about this common thread of fear of the ocean that you see in a lot of the ancient Israelites. My wife, she took some pictures while we were at that location where Mark Zeiss was talking about. There's a picture of the ocean here that she took that I also wanted to show you guys. That is, this is the ocean outside of this town called Caesarea. And you can see there, it's like crazy, choppy, scary oceans. That's what the oceans looked like outside of the town of Caesarea. And Mark Zeiss, he had taken us to this town, to Caesarea, to explain a little bit about this background of the ancient Jewish people. You see, there's this really interesting thing about the land of Israel. I've also got a map of the land of Israel, and I want to point out one very interesting thing that Mark Zeiss pointed out to us, the map of Israel. You can see it's got a very straight coastline. Just there's no harbors, there's no inlets, there's no safe spots from the like craziness of just the open ocean. It's just a straight line. There's no harbors, there's no natural harbors. Now, if we contrast this to like the land of ancient Greece, which was one of the trading partners of the people of Israel. I also have a map of the Greek peninsula. You can kind of see it's very different. It's a lot more ragged. It's not that kind of straight line. I've got a map here of ancient Greece that we can pull up. And you can kind of see there's all these little inlets, all of these little safe havens, all of these little harbors that can kind of free you from the seas. And the difference between these two areas, between Israel and between the Greek peninsula, just between the geography of those two places, ended up really, really affecting the cultures of those places. The Greeks were seafaring people. They were people that got out on the oceans. They traveled the oceans. There are archaeological dig sites where they find these ancient Greek ships. You've probably seen, even in movies and in Greek war movies, even in like the movie 300, you can see these massive Greek ships. The Greeks, they had lots of these like safe harbors where they could kind of save themselves from all the craziness and the waves of the ocean. And they could take off from their boats from there out into the ocean. They were seafaring peoples. But the Israelites never were. They had no natural harbors. So they had a very different relationship with the ocean than the Greeks did. It's really interesting. Our guide told us a fact that I had never known before, which is that a lot of archaeologists believe that the Philistines, the people that you hear about in Old Testament stories, Goliath himself was a Philistine, in the famous David and Goliath story. A lot of archaeologists and historians believe that the Philistines were actually Greek settlers who had left the Greek peninsula on these boats across the Mediterranean Sea and landed in Israel and settled kind of in this southern part of Israel, and that they were probably of Greek descent and most likely seafaring pirates, basically. The Philistines were the pirates of that day. And so you kind of understand why the Israelites were so afraid of them. Not only were they these kind of ruthless, warring people, but they were people who braved the seas. Something that none of the Israelites did. The Israelites were terrified of the seas. They were not a culture that went out onto the seas. And that was pretty much the case for all of the 2,000 years of the Jewish people until about the time of Jesus. Shortly about the time of Jesus, in this town that me and my wife got to visit, Caesarea, King Herod, who you've also heard of in stories in the New Testament, he decided he was going to physically build a harbor there at Caesarea, and he was going to name it after the emperor, which is why it's Caesarea. It's named after Caesar, the emperor. And the way he did it is he just literally took stones. They mined stones from the inland mountain parts of Israel. They took them out to the ocean, and they just sunk these massive stones. I've got a little bit of a picture of this. I tried to take a picture. It was kind of far to see, but I tried to circle here. You can kind of see, I was looking across the harbor. There's even some of these ancient stones that they sunk into the ocean. They're still left there. You can still kind of see them. And basically what they did is they sunk these stones starting from the coastline all the way out, miles out into the ocean, to create kind of these massive rock walls that were going to protect the harbor from the waves of the open ocean. And that was the very first time in Israel's history that they had an open harbor, that they were able to be seafaring people. But even still, those seeds, those fears of the sea, they were deeply ingrained in the Jewish people. And at that time, Caesarea really never became a major Jewish center. Most of the people that sailed out of Caesarea were still Greeks, Romans, other Gentiles. The Jews themselves, it was deep in their culture, this fear of the seas and fear of the oceans. And so with that context in mind, I think reading this passage in Genesis kind of gives us a different perspective of what the Jews thought of the water and of the land. So I'm going to reread it for us again, starting in verse 6. So this is Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 6. And keep this in mind now, that the Jews are people who are afraid. They fear the water. They fear the ocean. And starting in verse 6, it said, "And God said, 'Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water.' So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called that vault Sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, 'Let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry ground appear.' And it was so. And God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good." What we see here is God doing the same thing that I think he's doing in all of this creation story in Genesis, in this poem that's describing God creating the very beginnings of the earth. What we see God doing is we see him taking these chaotic things, these things that are just crazy. There's this chaos and disorder everywhere, and we see him organizing it. He's bringing everything into place good. And what he does in this moment is he takes the water, the thing that the Israelites are the most afraid of, and he corrals it, he controls it, he places it into one place. He collects it together, and he calls that the seas. And out of those seas comes the dry land. Now the Jews, they loved what that represented, because that meant that God was the God who was powerful, all-powerful over the seas, and the actual creator of the dry land, the safety and security of dry land that they were so excited about, what they were used to, what they were comfortable with. It meant that God was so powerful, so in control, that he could actually push the seas away, gather them together into one place, and create the dry land. God was the one who was in control of the very thing that they feared the most, the seas that they feared the most. Now, this kind of metaphor of the land versus the seas is something that comes up over and over and over again in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus even kind of referenced it a little bit sometimes. And rather than me kind of go in and describe it all in detail for you, a few weeks ago I showed you guys a video from the Bible Project, and I found another one recently that just explains it even better than I do. It's just a couple minutes, and in this video, Tim Mackey from the Bible Project and John Collins, they explain a little bit about how this metaphor of the land and the seas worked for the ancient Israelites, and a little bit about what the spiritual meaning of those different components are, especially as we lead into Jesus. So let's watch this video.
But remember, the biblical poets lived in an ancient culture, which means that some of their metaphors might seem kind of strange to us.
Like what?
Okay, so picture chaotic water, like a deep, stormy ocean.
Got it.
Now, think about a time you were in danger, and then map those two onto each other, and...
Danger is like chaotic waters.
Right. And then the biblical authors take it further. They also talk about dangerous people as stormy waters, like in Psalm 69. Save me, O God, for the waters are up to my throat. I've entered the deep waters. My enemies outnumber the hairs of my head.
Oh, the enemies are dangerous waves.
Yes, and so are enemy nations. Like in Isaiah 17, woe to the nations that rage like the raging, roaring seas. Or in Psalm 89, O Lord, you rule the swelling seas. You scatter enemies with your mighty arm.
So this is a basic metaphor for danger and chaos in our world. But God has the power over chaotic waters.
Right. And this foundational image is so important, it's introduced on page 1 of the Bible.
Oh, right. The uncreated world in Genesis 1 is a dark, chaotic ocean that God brings order to.
Exactly. The image begins there and then develops throughout the rest of the Bible, and so does its opposite. If chaotic water is a fundamental image of danger, think about what dry land would represent.
Dry land would be safety, security, stability.
Exactly. Some of the most basic human desires. And that is what God's providing when the dry land appears in the opening pages of Genesis.
And this is also where God plants the Garden of Eden.
And it's no average garden. It's described with imagery of an ancient temple, high above those dangerous waters. And then from this garden temple flows a river that waters everything.
So the human ideal is to be with God in a mountain garden temple.
Yes, this image permeates biblical poetry, like when David celebrates God's presence in the temple in Psalm 65.
How blessed is the one who's satisfied with goodness in your temple. A stream of God waters the land. You still the roaring of the waves and the turmoil of the nations.
Now watch. Because the temple was associated with being close to God's presence, this high rock could become a metaphor for God himself. Like in Psalm 18, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer.
And that's the image Jesus is drawing on when he says that listening to him is like building your house on the rock.
Exactly. And so notice how these rich metaphors in biblical poetry are rooted in images from earlier biblical narratives. That's how metaphors work in the Bible. You need the narratives to understand the poetic images, and the images reveal deeper meaning in those narratives.
So I could go to a million different verses all throughout the Bible. I love the way they did in that video. They referenced several of them, both in the Psalms and in the prophets, and even Jesus himself. You see all of them. They're riffing on this idea of the chaotic oceans. They mention their enemies. They reference their enemies as the chaotic oceans, as the seas. And I don't think that was accidental. Again, like I said, the Greeks were seafaring peoples. The Egyptians even had boats, so they were out on the seas. All of the enemy nations, they were seafaring peoples. The Israelites were the ones that were not. So in their minds, their enemies are the people that go out on the oceans, out on the open seas. And the land kind of comes to represent all throughout the Bible the safety, the security, the solidness of trusting in God. And so in this passage in Genesis, you kind of get the beginnings of that, the very first hint of that for the Israelites. They're able to see that God is the creator of the dry land. God is the creator of that solid ground for them to stand on. God is the one who has the power over the seas to create a safe place, which is dry land. And I love that in that Bible Project video, they connect the dry land, the way that the Jews thought about the dry land, with the way that Jesus taught in that parable that you may have heard of, where he talks about the person who listens to his words and puts them into practice is like somebody who's building a house on solid ground, on dry land. Somebody who's not building it on the sand, on the area right by the ocean where the ocean and the seas are going to come in and tear it and break it down. No, they're building it on solid ground, on the solid ground, on that land that God created in the very beginning. And that power over the waters, that power over the land is something that is exclusive to God all throughout the Bible. And I think that when we understand that, it really, really helps us to understand certain key moments in Jesus' life specifically. And I wanted to reference one of them that once I learned all of this, it just it changed everything. I completely understood this passage in a new way that I had never understood it before. And this is in Mark chapter 4. Specifically, it's a famous story that many of us have heard of, where Jesus calms a storm. That's what this passage is called, Jesus calming the storm. I'm going to read it for you, starting in verse 35. It says, "That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. And a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' This is the interesting part. They were terrified, and they asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" You see, this is pretty early in Jesus' ministry. This is something that happens right at the beginning of the book of Mark. And up until this point, I think that the disciples, they knew that Jesus was a man of God. They knew that Jesus was powerful. I think in their minds, they thought maybe he was a prophet. Maybe he was a very powerful prophet who could do these miraculous things. But there's a reason that this miracle in particular scares them. This miracle shows them that things are different. Jesus is very different than maybe what they were thinking originally. And I think the reason they think that is because Jesus has power over the seas. Jesus is able to control the water, speak to it, and calm this storm that was threatening to drown them, their biggest fear. The reality was that for the Jews, God was the only one who had power over the seas. God himself was the one who could control the seas and create the dry land. And so when Jesus does it, when Jesus calms the sea specifically, they realize this man is not a prophet. This is the Lord himself. I think this is the moment where it is first starting to occur to them that God himself has come into their midst because Jesus is able to control the waters, to control their biggest fear. And I've always been a little bit bothered by Jesus' response to them. He seems to kind of get mad at them and say, "Why don't you have any faith? Don't you trust what's going on here?" He gets angry that they were even scared. Personally, I understand why they were so scared. I mean, they were afraid of drowning, and it's something that in their whole culture, they were very afraid of this, very afraid of the water and of the seas. But I think that the reason that Jesus specifically is so upset with them in this moment, he says, "Don't you have any faith?" And I think what he really means by faith is he's just asking them, don't you trust me? Don't you have trust that I have power over these things that you fear? And I think that's the question that I really want to ask today. I just really want to end with us focusing on this question. What are the things that we fear? I've talked at lots of different points about the various things that I fear. I've had a lot of anxieties, a lot of fears, a lot of things that I am very worried about. But what are you afraid of? I want you to take a moment, think of that. What are the things that you're afraid of? Are you afraid of government control. That may be something that's coming up a lot with the election. A lot of people have on their minds this fear of persecution, of control, of loss of freedom, of the government taking over. Is that something that you're afraid of? Well, I would kind of challenge you to remember that in the scriptures itself, it says that God is the one who is in power over the government. In the same way that he was in power over the seas, this thing that the Israelites feared, God is the one who is in power over the government. So I think Jesus could ask us that same question. Don't you have any faith? Why are you afraid of this? Why are you so scared in this moment? Maybe it's not government, though. Maybe it's just money. Maybe it's not having enough. Maybe you're not sure where your next paycheck's going to come from, or where the food is going to come from. And Jesus has a similar response to people that are afraid of not having enough, of not having the things that they need to survive. Jesus tells them, God is the one who is in control. God is the one who is in control of those things. God knows who you are. He cares about you. And he's not going to let you go hungry. He's not going to let you go without. Why are you afraid? Why do you have so little faith? Don't you trust in me? The list could go on and on. There's a million different things that we all fear. And I think the challenge that I would really encourage you is if you go through the scriptures, I think you're going to find that over and over and over again, all of the things that we fear, there's a scripture, there's a verse, there's a passage for the fact that God is in power and in control over all of those things that we're afraid of. If I had to sum up just kind of one general message for the entire book of Genesis, for what this early part of Genesis, this creation story is showing us, I think it is showing us that God is the one who is all-powerful and in control of everything. And that really is good news. That's really good news for God to be in control. I kind of have like a funny way that I've thought about this a lot. It's really become real to me in a way recently because I've kind of become a basketball fan. I've become a sports fan. My wife was able to get me into basketball. And because I live here in Memphis, I've been a Grizzlies fan. And over the last few years, the Grizzlies have had some success. Not some. They made the playoffs. They've done all right. They haven't won a title, but they'd had some success. But over the last kind of few years, when I was a fan of them, they weren't really good. The team was not really good, and a lot of it was because the people that were running the team were making some terrible decisions. They made horrible trades. They got rid of some of their best players for nothing. They didn't. They were just making horrible decisions. And the general manager of the Grizzlies at the time was a guy named Chris Wallace, and that name basically became like a cuss word amongst most of my friends. People could not stand Chris Wallace because we did not trust him. We did not think that he was a good manager who was in control of the situation. And about a year ago, the Grizzlies, they got rid of that manager. They hired a new manager, Zach Kleiman. And let me tell you, this guy has been killing it. It's been awesome. This has been one of the best times to be a Grizzlies fan. They got an incredible rookie. They did great this year, far exceeded expectations, have made some amazing trades that just everybody is talking about how amazing they're doing. And my attitude of being a fan of this team has just completely changed now that I trust the person who is in control. I am in this place now where I can just have so much more fun and just really, really enjoy cheering for my team because I trust the general manager who is in control of all of it. I really think that is the message that the scriptures are trying to get across to us. The general manager of our team is the one who is in control and who makes the perfect decisions every single time. God, the God who is in control of the seas and the waters, that is the God who is calling the shots and who is in control in a way that we can trust in. The very last book in the Bible is the book of Revelation, and it brings up a lot of these different topics that I've brought up at different points in time. I think it's really interesting to notice that the beast, what some people think is maybe the Antichrist, rises out of the ocean in the book of Revelation. I don't think that's a coincidence. Again, the Israelites were afraid of the ocean, and that's where the beast comes out of the ocean. But what the book of Revelation is really about, this is what I think the whole book is about, is it is showing us that the God who is in control of the seas wins this battle in the end. We are on the winning side. We are on the winning team. And because of that, there is really nothing for us to fear. So I wanted to end today with just a little bit of a song. I asked Joey and Reagan to come back up and sing a song just to kind of end our day focusing us in on that reality, on the fact that we can trust in the God who controls the winds and the waves and who is in control of everything else, everything that we could fear, whatever it may be. God is the God who is in control of that, and you can trust in that. You can bank on that, and the peace and joy that gives you is indescribable. That's really changed my life in a huge way. So that's what I want to pray for you all today, that you would be able to experience that in the same way that I have. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for using so many of these scriptures to show us the power and the control that you have over all of the things that we may fear. Help us to learn that there really is nothing to fear. Whatever the things that we may be afraid of, you are in control. You are the one who wins in the end. And we really have nothing to fear when we know that we are on your side and that you are on our side, really. So help us to realize that. Help us to have that reality be a real thing, especially in this season as we move into the elections, as we move into what may possibly be a season of turmoil for so many of us. Help us to trust in the control and the power that you have. In Jesus' name, amen.
Through waters uncharted, my soul will embark. I'll follow your voice straight into the dark. And if on the course you intend I depart, speak to the sails of my wandering heart. Like the wind you guide, clear the skies before me, and I'll glide this open sea. Like the stars of your word will align my voyage and remind me where I've been and where I am going. Lost in the shallow hemisphere and fog. Your truth is the compass that points me back north. Jesus, my captain, my soul's trusted Lord. All my allegiance is rightfully yours. Like the wind you guide,
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Tonight. That was... We are so grateful that you decided to tune in and to watch and to worship and to hear from God today. Remember to tune in Wednesdays for the deep dives. I hear this week's going to be a little different and special, so you don't want to miss that. So, that is the end of our service. Will you pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this night of worship where we've come into your presence and learned and grown closer to you tonight. Be with us as we go through this week. Help us to keep what we've learned in mind and to always look forward to your presence. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for joining us. Have a good week.